panelists introduce themselves very quickly. They're also going to share their journeys. I think it's really interesting when you see someone like this and you say, how did that person get there? Particularly when they wear a t-shirt to an event. And they all have amazing journeys. They're very successful people. They have a lot of experience. And they're very generous people. So besides today, you should be able to ask them questions beyond this. But when we ask them to introduce themselves, they're going to talk a little bit about themselves and then share a little bit of their journey. And then I'll talk about the topic. So let me go ahead and do our panelists.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Do I need an introduction? Hi, my name is Paul. I have been in customer success for a very long time. I showed up to my first job with a sleeping bag and a dream. A year later, I was running all customer functions. That was back in 1999 when JavaScript was illegal. And I kept doing that pattern. I would join young companies, be the first customer-facing person until I was, leading teams. I just started my own company because Mark made consulting look so sexy. I thought, I would love to do that, work like a fraction of the time and make twice the money. I discovered he lied about that. So it's an honor for me, as part of the governing council of the Customer Success Leadership Network, to be able to be with this panel tonight and share our experiences, and particularly their experiences.
Great. I'll kick it off.
Please do.
So I'm Sanjeev Sisodiya. I lead the customer success team at Postman. And my journey was kind of circuitous to get to customer success. So I started off, as many people in the Bay Area, as a developer. I started working at, we'll see how many people remember, a company called Silicon Graphics.
Yeah.
Wow. Older crowd. And was on the technical track for a good first 10, 15 years of my career. My last technical job was CTO at a small startup. And I was also using an outsourced engineering team to do part of that work. That startup ran out of money, like most of them do. And but I got to know the CEO of this software services company, a much larger company, who was looking for people who could talk to customers and have sort of a technical background and talk to the software companies that they were selling to. So, and he had this great recruiting tactic. He would say, "Oh, come try it for a year and see how you like it." And I ended up being there for 7 years. And I used to be one of those developers, most developers probably, like, who thought that everybody else in the company just collected the money and we were the ones that did the hard work. And it turned out that I really enjoyed talking to customers and understanding how value gets delivered after the product's built and how you keep customers. And so left Persistent after creating a chief customer officer role there. It was a 10,000 person company, great title, had nobody reporting to me. And the issue was it was a company that had a really strong sales culture. And so customer success there was really about culture change as much as it was building a customer success function. And I decided I didn't really want to go on that 5-year journey. So I looked for a product company, a smaller company, and actually met the CEO of the company I'm with now, Postman, at another customer success event in San Francisco, organized by Srisha. So I have this Srisha to thank partly for having this job. So that's my story so far.
But your current scope includes what functions?
So Postman's pretty unique from a customer success perspective. Part of the reason I joined is the founding team and the board were very clear about the company being structured around 3 roles. Product, we're very much a product-led company, brand and marketing, and then customer success. And so customer success umbrella at Postman includes support, customer success, and sales. And somebody had the question earlier when I said, I have the sales team. Is like, oh, you own renewals, right? And I was like, no, I actually have the sales team. So it's a pretty unique opportunity to sort of try and build customer success DNA across all 3 parts of the organization. And so far, so good.
Fantastic, thank you.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, Raman.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raman Kumar. I work for a company called Idaptive. Idaptive is in the space of next-gen access, providing access using single sign-on or MFA to end users and so forth. We are actually a spin-out of a company called Centrify. Centrify has been around for the last 14 years. It's still in existence. And last year, we had a new investor, a private equity firm, Thoma Bravo, came along and became the majority investor. And they looked at our company, and we had 2 significant businesses, one on-prem, one in the cloud, one with servers, one with employees and end users, and they decided to spin out the cloud business into a new company called Idaptive. So as of Jan 1st, Idaptive is running independently as its own entity. We have common customers with Centrify, and I've been with Centrify for 7.5 years. And my journey in customer success started in the audience, like all of you, 6 years ago, where I was leading the support team at Centrify. And we had started the cloud business, but we added maybe 10 customers who were paying. We had a few trials and customers using our free service, but that's where the interest started around adoption, retention, onboarding, and the value of subscription. So the journey started over there. Attended a few sessions like these, read, and then spoke to our CEO, and he said, makes sense. Why don't you convert one of those support recs you have into a CSM? I was like, no, that's CSM, the support. He's like, your choice.
Yeah.
So we made the decision to convert a support rec to a CSM, and that's where the journey started. Today, at Idaptive, in customer success, we own all the post-sales functions, so it is onboarding, support, services, training, and renewals as well.
Fantastic. So when we talked about the journey of the titles, like where'd you start?
So started off with as a sysadmin, IT admin, became a tech support engineer, became a manager, director of support, director of customer success, VP of customer success.
Fantastic. Another thing we'll talk a little bit about later is the fact that you've had great success in the subscription model, and they started to apply some of the things you've learned in the on-prem world, which
correct.
You know, we don't always get to talk about that, so that's going to be one of the things we can look forward to tonight. Fantastic. And who is this striking young man?
Hello, my name is Joseph, co-founder and CEO of Twine. So very different journey actually from both of you guys. I went to school not too far away from here. So over a decade ago, I was at Berkeley, studied statistics and organizational dynamics. And when I was there, actually like 3 or 4 years in, got really, really fascinated by the Quantified Self-Movement. For anyone that's not familiar, basically this movement where you quantify every element of self. So at some point, I actually had a spreadsheet tracking like hundreds of different variables about myself, taking different supplements, like checking effects on like sleep levels, energy levels, all sorts of stuff. Only reason why I bring that up is because that got me really fascinated into the people analytics space. Just like what happens when companies actually gather this level of data on individual people. So I did a bunch of research in that space, ended up working as a consultant after I graduated for 3 or 4 years, mainly for like software clients. So Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon were a couple of my clients. After a couple of years there, I actually did a 180 and actually wanted to get into hardware. So I went to Nike, who was one of my clients as well. We started a hardware innovation team that scaled from 0 to 30 very, very quickly, and then eventually grew bigger than that. The team got like reabsorbed into the broader Nike organization. I didn't feel like it was a great fit, and I went back to business school. So several years ago, I went to business school. I was at Wharton. I met my co-founder, Nikhil, who's brilliant. He's a Harvard-trained physicist and computer scientist. The two of us started like hacking on a whole bunch of different ideas. And we became really fascinated with like the new people function, right? It wasn't HR anymore. It was a lot more focused on like strategy and culture building and analytics. We're seeing hundreds of these titles called chief people officers popping up all across the West Coast and the East Coast. So long story short, we ended up like hacking on a bunch of ideas. We ended up speaking to 200 chief people officers across the valley, built this incredible network. About a year and a half ago, we ended up actually formally starting this company called Twine. Raised several $1 million. The basic premise is, can you actually build this like master analytics layer that'll ingest all data from every single underlying HR system and build like a beautiful visualization layer on top that'll tell you everything from gender diversity to pay parity to what schools generate our top performers, to who our top performers are in the first place, to how people are compensated relative to market, and so on and so forth. Like a holistic analytics platform specifically built for people in a way that only takes you 2 or 3 seconds to like answer all those key questions. The reason why I'm here is I met Shrisha and Paul as part of this like standard thing that I do every single time I build a function. So we're building out our customer success function for the first time. I try to talk to like 3 or 4 of the smartest people in the world about customer success. The top 2 are right here, by the way. And yeah, it was, we ended up kind of bouncing around ideas, becoming friends, and now I'm here. So I'm the resident ignoramus here in customer success, but I have some ideas around like how we build customer success from like a first principles basis, rather than, yeah.
Fantastic. And exactly, so the idea is early stage companies I didn't ask him to be part of the panel just because he has a high opinion of me, which doesn't hurt, but he really got it. And one of the things that really impressed me is Joseph had spoken to everybody. He has every CS person leader on speed dial. He understood the space, so he's got a great perspective on how a young company should be leveraging, because I think he really understands it. So we've got some veterans, we've got someone who's very bright in using the CS effectively. So let's get into the topics. So the first topic today, actually we're gonna narrow it down to 3 questions. When should you add CS, and what are the criteria for deciding? What are the outcomes it should own in the early stage? How do you decide? What should it not own? And then we're gonna end, we'll end with some best practice, but before that, what are some of the differences in the earlier stage and the later stage? All right, so we'll go through the panel, they'll give their insights, try to take comments, hold your applause to the end, maybe. So number 1, when should you add or start CS in a B2B SaaS company? And what are the criteria for deciding?
So I can speak to sort of when it happened at Postman. I don't know either that I have a perfect answer for every situation, but Postman's a very classic freemium model company. So we have 7 million users. The vast majority of them are using the free product. And at Postman, the point of adding customer success was when there was a significant enough transition from the free user base to the paid users. And it was for a couple of reasons. There's a level of support that you give to your free users, but then once somebody's starting to pay you, then you really have to sort of think about what that value exchange is, right? So for Postman, actually, the interesting thing, and maybe it would be related to your experience, customer success actually kind of started in support. So when I started, there were 3 people in the support team, and they were doing support, customer success, a little bit of sales. And in retrospect, I think that was really great, because support is where, for us, every customer can have an interaction with us. And because we're growing so much from that freemium model, we haven't really talked to most of our customers, right? And so this is the best channel for us to start that interaction. So for I think, in lieu of anything else, and of a first principle strategy, I think for many organizations, it's a great place to start looking at how are you building the metrics around how you do support and how that provides value to your customers. And 2 things that became really apparent to me, Postman, and this happened actually before I joined, one of our founders was doing support, and the support team had really established a great voice with customers, and I think this is something that's really important as you build out the customer success function, is what voice do you have and how do you speak to customers? So the voice, and then we got very early on into being very metrics driven, right? So every support ticket that we answer, CSAT survey goes out, and we look at every piece of feedback. So I would say for us, it was start with the place that you're talking to customers already, and then sort of build around that.
Okay. Yeah, but I want to ask one follow-up, because the question regarding criteria, here it was basically a simple go-to-market strategy where you felt like the product, the higher value product, needed a higher value service package. Mm-hmm. Was that simple?
In retrospect, sort of, but I don't think at the time, right? Like at the time, it was, honestly speaking, it was like, we have a product team, we have a go-to-market team, and then how are we going to define all of the interactions with our customers on a one-to-one basis? And the options are you build a separate sales, success, and support teams. And in Postman's instance, I think they took sort of the courageous view to say, okay, we're going to frame all of these interactions around customer success.
Nice. That's fantastic. Raman.
In my experience, I think the CSM team starts, I think, when you start adding customers in a B2B company. It does go beyond Series A. I think it takes all of the money that someone raises in Series A to build the product, if it's a B2B infrastructure security product, if not all, most of it. And when you start your go-to-market engine plan, that's when I think you start seeding the desire that you're going to need someone in customer success to take the calls when people have problems, or proactively give them the service they're going to need to get them to be successful. So I would think early on, that's when it starts. I think at Centrify, what happened was, it was an on-prem company, so the products are very sticky. They get deployed. The products get deployed on servers. Retention was really high. But the cloud business, which started at Series C and D, as soon as we got to 20 customers, that's when we started realizing they're all going to need the adoption, someone to measure it, track it, monitor it, provide the onboarding we had to. And then when it comes to renewal time, even though they did not do the renewals for subscription, at least they removed all the hurdles that came along the way. So I would think at that stage, that's when the investments should be made. I've seen companies much smaller at the Series A where they've just started selling, they've hired the support person first, which I think is the first step into that organization being eventually transformed into customer success. But I think it starts early on, or it should start early on if it does not.
I completely agree. And Joseph is going to tell us when it started for him, because I think,
Yeah.
Please share your experience.
Yeah, very brief. I mean, for me, it's day zero.
That was the right answer, by the way.
Yes, thank you. It's day zero. I think it's basically when you get your first. We probably started when we had our first like 4 or 5 customers, but realistically, when you have your first like 1 or 2. That being said, to Sanjeev's point, I think it was, it is idiosyncratic and it is dependent on your company. Like for a freemium product, you very likely just need an administrative support function. For us, we sell to executive level users, so chief people officers across different companies. We also do tend to sell mid-market customers that are like 5 to 6 figure ACV. And at that level, one of the things that you can definitely differentiate yourself on is the level of like customer success and support that you dedicate. So it was a no-brainer to start super early.
And you don't even have a support person. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was founder-led. So both myself, well, now we're getting into the nuance. So both myself and my co-founder led all customer success for the first, let's say, dozen or so customers. We also forced engineers to sit in on like 3 to 4 customer meetings every single week. So a very, very high amount. And we can talk about what that entails. One of the things we actually actively hire for are like product-minded and like customer-minded engineers. So it wasn't that uphill battle that a lot of companies tend to relate to. Like engineers don't want to talk to users and so on and so forth. They loved it and they found it really accretive to their own development. So yeah, it was all non-customer success manager led essentially in the early days.
And I think that's a really important point, which is, we were talking about the function of customer success, but at least Postman, again, founder-led company, customer success was effectively how the company was built. Like, the product was launched as a download on the Chrome web store, and the CEO was doing support, the founders were doing support and success, and so I think philosophically, you're absolutely right. It starts day zero, and then when you get to the function, I'm sure will vary from organization to organization.
And Raman, I was joking earlier. I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable about giving the only wrong answer of the evening. But I think what you see is, particularly for an organization that's been around for so long, that's actually the common thinking, right? I talked to a lot of companies that they've been around for a while, and I was at TalkBox. TalkBox was already a public company. They're well established, and for years, their customer engagement was led by support. I was the first customer success leader in the organization. And of course, like the NPS started at 1, 6 months later, it was at 60. Because they weren't doing anything, that we know to be best practice. So I actually think Raman's experience is more typical, right? And maybe many of you here have that experience as well, right? All right, so I do want to talk about criteria. I think we explored different types of go-to-market strategy, number of customers, excellent. Any quick comments or punctuation, Irene?
Go on.
Okay. So going to the next one, what outcomes should CS own or support own? Should CS own and support in the earliest days? How do you decide what should it not own?
So one simple one for what it should not own, at least in our case, and I think in general, is focusing on renewals and sort of the sales bits of the function too soon. So I would say not own renewals. What it should own is a harder question to answer, I think. And for, again, sort of speaking from a Postman perspective, one of the things we're doing right now, which is sort of in some ways reverse, is we're doing value discovery. So again, Postman grew up at many sort of SaaS companies where you can download the product for free, you can sign up with a credit card, and so we haven't spoken to the vast majority of our customers. And so we have our own notion internally of what they find value in. But one of the things we've been doing over the last 3 months, and probably do over for the remainder of the year, is just effectively interviewing our existing customers and finding out from them what they find, what value they find in the product. The idea being that it's probably more authentic, and we'll learn stuff, and then we take that information, ideally coalesce it together, and then that's something that we can disseminate to our broader customer base. So value discovery is a really key thing for us right now.
You actually you said you had sales, you had support, you had CS, the atypical charter, but
Yeah.
what did it start with initially?
Support. So when I started, it was support team, and then support, then we added customer success, and we're just now adding sales. And it's really interesting to bring sales into that context where both of the other success exists before sales.
Because you didn't have enterprise sales originally. Or
We
you
did.
wasn't an enterprise market, yeah. Awesome.
In my experience, customer success, the CSMs I think mostly should own the onboarding, the engagement, the driving the adoption, helping customers extract value. But I think as the organizations get larger, the leader, I think, should hold the accountability for the entire customer journey or anything after the sale happens. So I think two phases. If the CSM, if you look at their world, they should not own the renewals probably. They should just focus on what's right for the customer. But for the organization, they should expand into a larger accountability where every touch point makes a difference. And in my experience, I did not own renewals for the longest time. I've only owned it for 4 months. And it has given a different perspective for me as well in terms of how I can put things together to make sure the number is achieved. So that comes with a whole different level of expectations, but it helps me to execute on that desire rather than say, well, I don't own the number, I just assist the organization to get the number. But now that when you own it, it does give a different perspective. So I would, as a leader, I think it's good to have that perspective, not necessarily always own it. And larger companies, it will never happen, but the smaller the organization, it probably makes sense. But the CSMs and the renewal role, I think, are two different roles. I think the CSM should not be blended into someone doing the renewals.
Well, what does the CSM then do? What are the functions like onboarding, account management, engagement?
Correct. So I think when a customer comes on board, they start the process of owning the customer, starting the first handoff from sales and taking them through the journey, showing the customer that North Star that they need to follow and kind of guide them towards the North Star, helping them get to the value. If there are problems in this journey because they're engaged with services or they ran into a problem or the support team was not on top of things, then they become the de facto people to go to. But that's what I would say they should primarily own and start off with at least. And as they're deployed and happy, then they become more of, I'm going to nurture you and eventually provide you with updates and regular touches from our organization.
Do they also do training? And they don't do support.
I think no, they don't do support. I think it depends on the product. For the products I've been part of, the infrastructure, technology, or security products, I think it's hard for a CSM to be a trainer. It does need a lot of technical depth. Then I think if you hire someone with very strong technical skills, they might or might not be the most effective person to then guide them through onboarding and constant engagements and so forth. So it's a dual-edged sword, but they definitely have not seen do training. Training, I think, becomes its own silo over time. Initially, they do everything. Initial teams are all heroes. They're all heroic acts. But then as the company becomes more mature, I think that's when you start identifying more experts rather than generalists.
But when do you get involved in the sale? You get involved post-sale, right? You're not part of the transition?
Mostly post-sales. That's when, all the handoffs from sales to this team, and then if they have to go back and forth.
Nice.
That's wrong.
Uh-oh. Irene? Sorry, what would you like to say?
Well, I just think that, I think in an ideal world, and I know we don't all live in an ideal world, so I get that. But in an ideal world, I cringe every time I hear the word handoff. Because if you've ever been a customer, you don't want to be handed off.
True.
You want to have a smooth path. And so we tend, especially those of us who've come from on-prem, where there's very clear, distinct stages, to think about things that way. But I encourage everyone to think of it as more of a smooth journey. And I try to, when I'm running CS teams, I try to get my CS introduced during the sales process, so that it's not a handoff. That person's already been a part of the deal making.
Right.
For expectations and for, as Sanjeev was saying, kind of value discovery to understand what the customer's getting. You can't do that in a freemium or a self-service kind of sales model.
Yeah.
So a lot depends on the complexity and the go-to-market model of the product. But I think customer success has to own all of that post-sale, whether it's support, whether it's training, whether it's whatever. And when you're a very early stage company, you have Swiss Army knives that can do multiple things, and then you break off that screwdriver and you build a team of screwdrivers, and you break off the scissors and you build a team of scissors, and
Correct.
that's where your training and your support and so forth grows as you scale. That's my perspective.
As you were speaking, a number of people in the back row were saying, "Preach!" Any comments?
No, I totally agree with that. I love everything Irene says. But I would also add, if the CSM can't get engaged during if you don't have the bandwidth to get engaged during the sales process, at least CS management can get engaged during the sales process. It helps not only the sales, right, to build confidence with the client, but it also helps with that transition.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I think it really depends upon a lot of different factors. I mean, if you look, whether you're B2B, B2C, B2B2C, whether you're early startup or you're mature, what kind of product you have, does your product have implementation on it? I mean, there's a lot of different factors. If you ask 20 people in the room what is their definition of success and what are all the different components, you'll probably get about 14 different answers.
That's
So
true.
I think there's a lot of different things that you have to understand about the company and the product and the stage and all those things. So, because a B2C movement is extremely different than a B2B. I've always been in the B2B space and enterprise, and we've always, at least in our segmented higher value customers, success gets involved. If we have a 8-stage sales deal, we're in stage 7. We're in there before the deal closes, helping close the deal. So it really depends upon a lot of different factors on what success is and when does it get involved in. But the handoff piece is completely on them.
Well, let's just do a quick. I know one of the things Irene likes to do before these events is find out what kind of companies people are in. And I want to jump to the backgrounds. Let's just do a quick poll. How many people are actually CSMs right now or doing CSMs? How many of you are in B2B SaaS? How many of you, suddenly that seemed like we should go from big to little, but all right. How many of you are actually involved in the sales transition, meaning you are introduced before the sales is closed? Yeah, a lot of the people. And how many people join only after the sales is closed? We feel bad for you. I think there are a lot of functions. Let me ask you this, because this is one of the things that I've been able to enjoy in my teams, because, well, I wasn't an engineer. I like to read books about engineering. But I always had sales engineering as part of a function, and for an early stage customer success function, it's extremely powerful to have the people who are supporting the sale, particularly if it's technical, because then sales doesn't have to have that function for quite some time, and it keeps you integrated in the process. Have you seen that in your experience?
We sort of have that now. So we have, we're not large, we have one sales engineer, but he's involved both pre and post sale.
Yeah.
So part customer success, part sales engineer, I would say.
Yeah. Anybody, does anyone else have that or had that experience? Because we've got some very experienced people.
Our CSMs actually run trials during the sales process now. And in the past, they've also worked with having sales engineering be in customer success. The challenge there, if sales engineering is its own role, it doesn't really matter where it sits. It's still this person who comes in and leaves. And so I definitely agree that in the early stages, when you do have the Swiss Army knives, looking at sales engineering be a function that the CS team, who will then take the client forward, does, can be really powerful.
Yeah. And the one challenge that I have seen there is the guys who are people who are very good at sales engineering like the thrill of the hunt and may not thrive in the post-sales experience. I don't know if you've seen that. I had one guy who was outstanding. He liked to help close deals and do everything for it, and he was good with people, so I thought, oh, he's really probably good with managing accounts too. That was not the case. Like, oh yeah, there's a real difference there. That's another strategy. So we understand that many roles that customer success could own, and we're going to talk in a minute about what they should not own, or what the difference is in a mature company, but maybe we go ahead and just segue to it right now. In your experience, how have you seen the success organization evolve once it's become larger? Did you have the specialization of the roles? Did your functions get bigger or smaller or more specialized?
I'll pass this Roman first.
They surely get more specialized, surely. I mean, there is no doubt about it. The early stage companies, I mean, even today at Idaptive, we are 130 people. With Centrify and Idaptive together, we were 400 plus. So in Idaptive, we are spin out, so most of the employees came from Centrify, but the functions, we still started off with 8 in support, 3 CSMs or 2 renewals and so forth, but definitely at this stage, we are not even talking about can this person play 2 roles, because we're not that big, but not too small. But at Centrify, when we were 400 plus, the walls were clear, the lines were not blurred. If you're in support, you're only sitting and taking calls, and that's what you specialize in. That's what you get really good at. And someone would want to become an SC, want to become a services consultant, they move into that role and they specialize in that role. The leaders, I'm sure, as all of you, if you are leaders, you kind of see playing multiple roles, even if you own 2 functions and not 3 or 4. But I think for an individual practitioner, I think they specialize in one. At mature companies, not early stage companies.
You want me to answer the question around evolution?
Yes.
We're in the primordial stages.
Yeah, you are. You have a lot of experience in the enterprise also, but I do think that having many functions in the CS umbrella gives you a great opportunity to grow talent more easily, because when you're interviewing somebody, you can promise them a job path that can be really compelling. And when you have the silos of a bigger organization, if your organization supports that, of course you can try to sell that. But it's very convincing when you say to somebody, yeah, you could start as a support person, but you can become a developer engineer, customer-facing engineer. So that's extremely compelling, actually.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. And actually, I agree with everything that's been said in the last 5-10 minutes. So at the risk of sounding a little bit more extreme, I'll only talk about kind of net differences for early stage customer success. So, and by the way, actually on this previous debate, there's this phenomenal SaaStar podcast episode with the chief revenue officer of Flexport that talks a lot about that. They actually have their salespeople involved in customer success and post-sale stuff for up to 12 months or 18 months. So it's phenomenal. Really, really interesting model. Early stage customer success. What's interesting for us is again, ignoring or accounting for everything that they've said already. It's a very, very broad umbrella. It's literally do anything that you humanly can to make sure that our customers love us. So I can speak to what that broad umbrella looks like. It looks like organizing community dinners where we brought together 6 of the top chief people officers together for a 4-hour dinner where they just talk about top of mind issues. We didn't sell product at all. It involves me sending bottles of Dom Perignon to their offices after they become customers. That's a very Twine centric thing because I drink a lot of champagne. It involves just stuff that's non-standard, buying Birchbox became a customer, and we bought Birchbox boxes for the rest of the customer base. So stuff like that that's unscalable and idiosyncratic to the company, I think is actually supremely valuable. You might technically bucket it under community, or you bucket it under marketing or sales, but for us, all of that just falls under the bucket of generally make your customers successful and love you and really happy. And I think it's actually a really beautiful thing when you start customer success from day 0 and you're able to embed that ethos and philosophy into your company super early on before that all gets fragmented into 5 or 6 or 7 different roles or functions.
Yeah, a quick example of sort of exactly that happened. Actually, Carolyn's part of my team here, and we're doing a series of customer summits, the first set of customer summits that we'd ever done. And the CSMs we were starting to do all of our onboarding calls, and Carolyn interviewed a customer, and then 2 weeks later we get, or two days later we get an email from our marketing team saying, hey, we need speakers for all of our customer summits. Do you guys know anybody? And she was able to introduce one of the folks that she had just onboarded, I think a week before that, who came in, was one of the most popular talks in our customer summit in New York. So to your point about sort of customer success having fingers in all kinds of interesting places.
And I will echo as well, even at Centrify, when we were at 40-50 million of revenue, when we hired the first CSM for the cloud business, the set of customers on the cloud SaaS platform, that individual actually did all of this because he was the first person who came in. He came in from a strong customer success background. So he actually evangelized all of these things to do, and he, I think, did it up to a year or two, then the team became 2, 3, 4, and that's when I think it started fading away. That's when marketing hired a customer advocacy manager or customer marketing team came along. That's when things started changing, but I think that's absolutely bang on. The first person does come and create this viral effect for all our customers.
And then when we prepared, in preparation for a conversation like this, we had many hours of deep conversation. And I think one of the interesting things you shared is the success that you had with the customer success practices in the subscription model, where then people got excited about trying to leverage that in the on-prem stuff.
Correct. So our company, so Centrify, before it got spun out, was the customer base and revenue was 70% on-prem maintenance and 30% was cloud recurring. The customer success managers were primarily focused on the cloud business. What happened was, over the years, our salespeople, we had a separate sales team managing that business, separate sales team selling what they sold really well. Then we merged the sales teams at some point, and then we had one sales team sell everything. It was more of upsell, cross-sell strategy. When that started taking effect, the customers were buying 3 products from our portfolio, 1 cloud, 2 on-prem, and we would say, well, I'm your CSM for this cloud product, not for the on-prem. And that didn't go too far. At some point, the customer success team is for the customer, not for the product line. So luckily, the good work that we did for the cloud products got evangelized enough where the CEO, the CFO, and the head of sales, they all felt like it's time to expand this portfolio for all customers, all products. And yes, the definition of success is going to be different for someone who's on-prem, whether or the cloud. And we had a plan, it was approved, but then the acquisition happened and it never got executed.
Nice. So one of the facets of the question was, what should it not own, or what are some of the risks? And I think we've actually had a discussion around renewals, and a couple people felt really strongly that it shouldn't own renewals. Does anyone else have?
I think there's a difference between owning the renewal and being comped for the renewal.
Okay.
I think that gets
True.
conflated. So I think that CSMs being comped like a salesperson on a renewal comp plan is a bad idea. But owning the renewal, being, the whole team having a team number, which is your net retention, I think is really important.
Correct.
Yeah, comp has been,
That's a good point.
we've always defined ours, we have a bonus that's based on certain metrics, which may include renewal metrics and things like that. It's never comp. But
It's
then
not a quota based.
It's not quota, ever.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
But the other thing is, you have renewals, but then what about upsells and cross-sells and all that, so there's a lot of conversation that happens about that sales motion there, or the revenue motion, I should say. So I think renewal and upsell should stay within the CSM team, but when you're talking about cross-sells or additional sales with different use case or different business units, is a sales motion, because you have sales discovery and all those types of things, which are not a CSM motion.
But I do think this is one of the areas that evolves most notably from early to later, and that is, in the early stage, you never have compensation that's based upon the renewal, because you're so young, you don't know, it's hard to make that part of the package. But I did have an experience where I felt like I was able to actually attract stronger people. I mean, very capable people with consulting backgrounds who had been trained at Deloitte and places like that, when my package did have a component that was around renewals. Not the only thing, obviously, satisfaction and other adoption factors, but I did feel like I was more attractive on the market with that being part of the mix.
Is that because they're smarter, so they knew that there's more money there, so they were after that?
I definitely not smarter. I mean, sure they went to Berkeley, Stanford, and crappy schools like that, and not like Ball State. What I felt was, and I do think, and my own experience is definitely, it cannot be, you can't have a package that's like a sales package. You get the wrong people, they're not dedicated to the right outcomes. But in the market where it's competitive, you find people who are very savvy in shopping around. They're not just hungry for a job. They want a job with the absolute best, compensation, and they're very, sensitive to something like that, because that's what they were experiencing before, right?
I never hire salespeople into my CSM positions. My background is actually management consulting as well. Most of the people that I've used as CSMs in all my different jobs have come from some kind of consulting background.
Right.
But I don't agree with having any kind of quota or specific comp on renewals. Renewal metrics metrics and bonus-based, yes. But having the ability to be subjective in the recommendations and things that you're telling your customer that can never be equated to my compensation.
I think about it this way. How many times as a CSM do you shake your head because sales sold something and no way does the product do this right now? It may do it a year or two from now because it may be on the product roadmap, right? And what motivates that behavior? It's the comp, it's the money. That's what motivates that behavior. So if you start having CSMs own a number, you're essentially going to be rewarding that type of behavior to be repeated with the CSMs. I personally have always structured it to where CSMs are in charge of renewals only as part of their goal. And they do get an annual bonus, but it's not just on the renewals, it's on their NPS, it's on
Adoption
adoption,
metrics.
all of
Yeah.
them.
I think we're in agreement.
So, yeah.
Well, the success aspects will actually surface problems with your sales motions as well.
Sure.
Because you'll have a lot of bad behavior that happens in your sales motions, which are not to the value of the customer, and then the success team is left to try to deliver on those. Whether it is product features that don't actually exist, or whether or not you sold them 10,000 license seats when they're not going to use but 100 for the first year.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand all those different aspects.
Yeah, it's kind of like checks and balances in the organization too.
Yeah. George, I think you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to add to that?
I think Garrett answered the question there. It was just about, like I said, obviously not comping your CSMs on renewals is to make them a trusted advisor versus having the wrong goals. But then, is there somebody in the org that actually is comped for those renewals? And so they they're, maybe it's a manager, maybe it's a salesperson or something. But I think that the question was sort of answered us as well.
Okay.
And these metrics are driving to the point.
Yeah, and I was just doing a quick time check. There's one final question I want to get to before best practice. But I do think one of the things that on this topic, one of the things that later stage teams do better, and I think that earlier stage teams should be doing because it's so easy to do, and that is be data driven, right? In the beginning, you do everything you can to make things happen, but you see support people, for example, not structuring their data such that they can actually give weekly reports to the product team on like the areas or the components or the features of the product that are generating those questions. Super easy, like it's no-brainer stuff, but for whatever reason, earlier stage teams just don't think like that. They're in their hero mindset. And they say, God, product doesn't listen to me, and product doesn't do what I say. It's like, well, provide a service for them, right? Without being asked or told, give them insights on a weekly basis, and suddenly they'll start inviting you to the conversation. So I think it's interesting. I see that with talk to a lot of young companies, and they're not thinking like that, and I just don't understand why. Probably because they didn't come here. All right. So I do, quick time check, we're at 7:06. We have this conversation, and I think particularly for people who've been in the domain, we ask, like, where should the function report to? Do you care, right? I care, but probably maybe for the wrong reasons, but plenty of the right reasons. Do you have an opinion? I mean, who do you report to, and was that a factor?
It was definitely a factor for me in joining. I report to the CEO. I think a slight variation on that is who cares about it is, like, for us, it's as important as reporting to the CEO. The board actually cares about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other factor for me is reporting is obviously important for many reasons, but it's also who's asking for those numbers and those metrics and who cares about what you're doing as a function is I think at least has the ability to influence a broader conversation than where you might get pigeonholed otherwise.
You have a seat at the table.
Yeah, I think, but even slightly more than that is you have a seat at the table and people care, which is like, there are two different things sometimes.
You can have a seat at the table and be very diminished.
Yeah.
Sitting there, nobody gives a crap.
I sat in that seat.
Me too.
Wow. Let's keep it upbeat, guys. Raman.
Today I do report to the CEO, At Centrify, so my journey when I was in support, I was reporting to the co-founder and head of engineering because it was support only. As the role became larger than support, the CEO recognized it and said, I don't think you're really going to be successful in this role working for the head of engineering, who was primarily focused on engineering. So he moved the role and had me report to him, but I did not have a seat at the table. So it was effectively getting the visibility and learning and working towards what the goals were for the company, but it did not have a seat at the table. So collaboration with sales was harder for sure. However, at Idaptive, when we formed the company over here, the CEO, I think, did recognize that it's important to have the CS leader report into him. And the other reason why he also gave the renewals ownership to me was he wanted the sales leader to focus on new business because it was a new company, there's a lot of attrition happening among employees, a new market. So have him focus on that while let's not disrupt the existing revenue. But I honestly think over time, any company at this phase will eventually evolve to give ownership for all revenue to one person down the road. Eventually, I think that happens as companies get more and more mature as well. If not everywhere, but mostly I think so.
This question has prompted me to make a job announcement. I'm going to hire a manager or director level customer success person, and you'll report to me. I'm actually
It's good to be CEO.
I'm only being half facetious. No, actually, I'm 100% serious. I revise my probability. Look, I think it should definitely report to the CEO, and I think there's like one very specific early stage idiosyncrasy that makes it even more true, which is in early stage, customer success is actually a hybrid product manager. You're talking to like all these early customers, and what you're actually doing is like pulling out product insights, like figuring out what the use case is, like figuring out what best practices, how can you replicate that across like the broader client base? How do you codify that? How do you like spread that across other people? And there's a whole gamut of like champagne sending and other things I was talking about. So as a function of that, I think it's just super important because they're touching product, they're touching customer success, and for a founder to be like far away from that, I think it's pretty disappointing or pretty bad.
I think it also goes back to what I said in my other statement, conflict of interest. I was recruited for a company a couple of years ago as the VP of Customer Success, and I would report to the SVP of Sales. I immediately, that's one of the first questions anybody interviewing for any customer success job asks, who does this report to and who does the leader report to? Not that I don't think sales is perfectly lovely. I've built sales teams, I've worked in sales, but there was a major conflict in interest, and I turned it down and didn't continue past the conversation because it was that point.
So what if the sales leader is responsible for, or their main goal or comp is tied to net revenue add, and that sort of covers sales and CS?
Generally, that would be more, wouldn't that be higher up than a VP?
I mean,
A CRO, exactly.
Well, it depends like what, how big your company is.
Yeah, this one, it wasn't structured that way. I think if, I don't know, it still turns me off for some reason.
Turns me off too, so I can tell you why, because
Yep.
I have had, there's limited resources in every company, even more so in early stage companies. And when there are limited resources, you can't fight with your boss about whether you're going to spend those limited resources on the retention side or the acquisition side of the equation. You have to have a debate. In order to have a debate, you have to have two people. You can't successfully debate your boss. You will never win.
I think an important part is like the distinction of the ratio of new business versus renewal base, and also
Sure.
ease of renewal. And a lot of people think like renewal is less sexy than new biz.
I think, oh, go ahead. I was going to say, I think at some product, some companies it'll work, right? I don't think it's a one size fits all. It's my personal preference. The only reason why I said it was just to make sure that, those that are in the market and those that are looking for customer success are just being mindful about who it reports to, who they report to, and who it reports up to. I agree. I've reported to the COO and CEO, and both were fantastic. And the COO at HelloSign, I reported to the CEO of HelloSign for the first couple of years, and then the last year was the COO. And she had sales under her, and there was literally no conflict of interest. It worked well, but she was the COO. She also had HR. She
very short sales cycle, then you have opposing interests effectively.
And
Agree.
I
For
think
me, it comes down not
Oh,
just
sorry.
to the conflict between sales and customer success, but if I'm joining particularly an earlier stage company where the product's still being developed, and I'm representing the customers, I want to know that the customer voice is going to be central to the company, that it's not just like a revenue item.
Yep.
And when I see it reporting into sales or even a CRO at an earlier stage company, to me it signals that it's just about that money, and we might not get the ear of the CEO to bring up these really new exciting directions that the product could go to help customers, or these problems that it has. To me, it just, you need that voice of the customer to guide where the product and the company are going. And
Very good point.
I don't
Yeah.
want to be part of a company where that's not how they're structured.
I think that's a great point. I think Gary, you wanted to add.
I mean, very similar. I think where success rolls to tells you a lot about a company, whether it's rolls into support or operations or sales. But I think that in general, and there's no one size fits all, but in general, you should always report to the CEO. And what the level of that success layer is if it's, I mean, I've been head of success at a director level, and I've been head of success at a VP level, different size companies.
Yeah.
So regardless of what level that leader is, it should report to the CEO.
Fantastic. Fantastic discussion. I was just doing a quick time check. We're approaching 7:20. Why don't we do a wrap up? We wanted to get your final thoughts, anything that we didn't cover, if you have anything regarding success in an early stage company, and or we could just go to Q&A if we felt like we captured.
I mean, I'll say I still have imposter syndrome. We're still figuring most of the stuff out as we go on a daily basis. Carolyn can attest to this fact. So, you know, and so I think, you know, as much as we put all of this great structure around it, it's still, you know, kind of day one really in figuring out what the function is.
Early days.
Yeah.
I would just like to say I think it's a great function to have in companies. This function never existed or existed in different names and forms 10 years ago. So be part of it. But I think if you're trying to get into the function, if you're really passionate about it, don't worry about the reporting structure of the VP yet at this stage. Get your foot in the door, be part of the ecosystem. And as you move into a leadership role, you will build your opinion and that will transform who you want to be. However, that being said, some cultures are pretty messed up, even though you're a CSM.
Especially in early stage.
I would say that, but I think if you're trying to get in, just be part of the ecosystem first.
Nice.
I'll end on a philosophical tenet. So my co-founder and I are fans of saying that whenever approach A works, the exact opposite of approach A also works. It really depends on the level of conviction and level of like expertise upon which you like execute against that initiative. So sometimes it's like a perfect handoff. Sometimes it's like a very long transition. Like both of those things can work. There are different outcomes probabilistically, but there are definitively instances where both approaches work. So that's what we've learned in the last like year and a half of executing in a startup. Like anything can work. Literally, like whatever advice you hear, like the exact opposite of it has worked at some company before.
True.
And I think maybe my final thing, which is I think Irene alluded to, in the early stage you're hiring for DNA, people who have a history of growth, right? When we talked about, you know, Joseph and his experience, every time he went somewhere, like he you know, became a manager a year later. You see it with Sanjeev. He's an engineer, then he was a manager of an engineer, then he led groups. And I think if you find your earliest people, you gotta find people who are like that. You can't hire for a nice person. No, you gotta hire the DNA of someone who really wants to build and achieve, and it has a history of doing that already. What do you think? Okay. Yeah.
Question, really towards Joseph. So
Yeah.
with all the work you've done on Twine, I'm very curious to see if you've done any kind of cognitive work around where customer experience overlaps with employee experience. Have you guys looked at that intersection to see, you know, when companies have strong culture and measures of good employee experience, how that impacts their customers versus the alternative?
Yeah, there's some research behind it. I actually thought initially you were asking a different question, which is we have actually seen like all the tenets and best practices in customer experience start to get carried over to employee experience. things, right? So all the things that were like worked in sales and marketing are now being carried over to like HR and the people function. That specific question, yeah, there's some actually organizational psychology research around it. I can send it to you, but I don't have like the numbers off the top of my head.
I'd be very curious to get
Yeah.
that. Give you my
Yeah.
card after.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
let's give a quick round of applause. We have time for some Q&A. Do you have questions, anything we didn't get to talk about but you think would be interesting to know?
Jennifer?
No, I was gonna follow up with Irene's question. There has been research, and I think just to kind of tie it in with the last customer success meetup, they were just saying people who are served well
Yeah.
was
Those
something.
who are well served, serve well.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that's huge. And there was actually research. I think it was like 37% like higher customer satisfaction if you treat your employees well or something like that. There is definitely research out there, so I can say that.
Yeah, I want to find out.
Jennifer, you just published a book, am I correct?
I did.
What
Yes.
was your book?
So it's called The Startup's Guide to Customer Success. And what's really interesting is that I'm actually working at a very, very early stage startup. We're pre-Series A. So we've given a lot of flack to, why aren't CEOs doing this or why aren't CEOs doing that? And just to give some insight, they're always thinking about what will kill the business next, right? They're thinking about what if our go-to-market strategy doesn't work? What if we don't have product market fit? And I believe half of my job has been culture, has been ingraining customer, like becoming that customer champion within the company. And I remember when I first started, to answer your earlier question, they tasked me with referrals, which was absolutely the wrong answer because we didn't have onboarding, we didn't have engagement, we didn't have a renewals team, and they were like, you focus on referrals. I'm like, hell no, I'm doing onboarding and making sure that our customers are taken care of.
And then
Nice.
they'll be referenceable.
Exactly. So, yes, and
but
grown from there. But yeah, so it definitely is about a huge part of culture, or a huge part of my job is, championing the customer.
I want to do a time check, George. We said we're going to wrap up at 7:30. I don't know if we need to be out of here at 7:30 or we can stay till midnight. Or...
I think like a couple minutes after is absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
So everybody say goodbye outside the door.
Quick comment to something you said earlier. You talked about being data driven. I read an article a while back, and it was written by somebody from Google, and it talked about why you should not be data driven. And it wasn't saying don't be focused on the data, but really it was talking about instead of being data driven, you need to be data informed. Because there are so many companies, so many organizations that build metrics for the sake of metrics.
Sure.
And the metrics aren't actionable, they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So make sure that you understand the value, you understand the engagement, you understand the things you're trying to drive to, define the right metrics, and go by those. But you can't go by the numbers even when you do that. Because there are plenty of times when you will read a metric and it will say something, but when you speak to the person on the ground, the CSM that's there every day, it's a completely different answer.
Sure.
So I would just say, don't be data driven, be data informed.
Yeah. But have data.
But have data.
Yeah.
I'll end it is, one of my favorite sayings is, what was it? It was, I'll think of it. There's a saying I like that's around that.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments, something you want to share that you thought of when our panelists were speaking tonight?
I actually have a quick reaction to that. I mean, one is I think there's a ton of risks associated with being too quantitative, despite being like an analytics company founder. One is like you just pick the wrong metric and then you optimize around it and you just create perverse incentives inside your organization. Two is like a lot of things are measured on such long time horizons, it's actually difficult to like quantify the ultimate impact. So like all the stuff around community building is immeasurable via like any sort of metrics or like dashboards. And yet we invest a ton in like those relationships because we're playing the long game. Like we think 10, 20 years from now it's gonna pay off. So I have a lot of thoughts around that, and I think I have a lot of thoughts around like the limitations of analytics and like metric-driven decision making early stage.
I remember the saying, in God we trust, all others must bring data.
Yeah. Nice. All right, I think we should wrap up. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.